Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is the Vulgar Marxist. I was going to abandon this channel. It's not going where I'd like it to go. It's not doing what I'd like it to do. So I was simply going to hang it up and write it off as a loss. And then this week happened. In the space of the last 10 days, I have watched half a dozen media outlets engage in levels of stupidity I did not think were imaginable in the age of the internet. Vox published a horrifyingly bungled and inept article about wealth disparities. MTV released a video irrefutably demonstrating that feminism is now a band of petty bourgeoisie princesses sobbing that it's their turn to oppress the laboring class. And a YouTube author named Turd Flinging Monkey published a video that can only be described as gibbering incoherence regarding the concept of a universal basic income. Now, I had not finished a fraction of the preliminary work I would like to have done before delving into this level of stupidity. But I don't have a choice right now. In order to preserve my sanity, I have to address this. So we are accelerating our timetable. I am, instead of finishing the work I had started, laying out statistics and data sets on which to build theoretical foundations, we'll simply have to move forward addressing media outlets with the same statistics and data sets I would previously have laid out. That said, we are going to begin with the Vox article because the problems with this article are necessary to understand very nearly everything else that is being said by the other two commentators, that is Turd Flinging Monkey and Francesca Ramsey. Now, I am not going to publish either the article or the videos verbatim. I am not willing to risk DCMA claims against my channel. So we are going to do this by taking snapshots of the article, or more specifically, two graphs in the article, and addressing those. The article begins by attempting to draw a spurious correlation between the average wealth of a European American household and the average wealth of a African American or Latino American household. The problem here, as the article almost immediately goes into itself, is that the overwhelming majority of economic gains for the last 40 to 50 years have been accrued by the top 20%, with 80% of people losing staggering amounts of money. Anyone passingly familiar with American demographics should understand this means that huge numbers of European Americans, I would estimate possibly 60%, 70%, have in fact objectively lost out in this wealth accumulation, attributing the gains of the few and projecting them onto a population that has by no conceivable stretch of the imagination enjoyed them is both disingenuous and an artifice of class warfare or class antagonism. You are making the Reaganomic assumption that simply because the rich people are getting richer, this necessarily benefits everyone. How many times have we had to refute this, and yet the very people who are supposed to be helping us and projecting our message to the public are now claiming it is true? Yet this is, at the current time, a digression. The purpose of this video is not to illustrate class warfare in a direct sense, but rather to draw a clear line between gender and racial politics and class antagonism. You see, while class is a system of oppression from which those oppressed rarely realize they're even part of it, or for that matter, any means of escaping, the problem we are looking at right here is a matter of personal choice. Yes, I am willfully engaging in victim blaming right now. The African American community of the United States has made a staggeringly obtuse and stupid decision, which has cost them close to $1 trillion a decade in lost wealth, and that decision needs to be illustrated and made perfectly clear. It is to this end that the rest of this video is dedicated. Now, you will observe that the difference in wealth between a Caucasian household and an African American household is approximately $550,000. I am now going to go into why precisely this difference exists and why this is a reflection not of discrimination against African American peoples in any particular sense, but rather of cultural differences that are not compatible with the existing economic system. Those of you familiar with what my moniker refers to, that is vulgar Marxism, will understand the adage that all social systems are the result of economic systems. That is, the proletariat adopts a variety of mannerisms and postures and even roles in order to ameliorate the effects of their economic oppression. Those who fail or refuse to adopt these postures suffer a greater degree of economic oppression than those who do adopt these postures. This does not change in any way that the class oppression is still occurring. This merely means some people are suffering class oppression to a greater extent than other people. This is not direct or intentional, but rather the result of their own choices. When conservatives state that personal choice is the be-all and end-all of why people are poor, they are speaking with a forked tongue. It is not personal choice that makes them poor, it is class oppression that makes them poor. It is personal choice which ameliorates the effects of class oppression that occur upon them. There is a phenomenal website called Livingwage.mit.edu. And I am going to use the data on this website to illustrate what I am talking about. We will begin with the city of Atlanta, Georgia. Now, it can plainly be observed that the expenses of a 2-adult, 2-child household are approximately $50,000. These are not the average expenses, these are the minimum expenses. I have several friends in Atlanta who will happily tell you that finding a 3-bedroom apartment for less than $900 a month is next to impossible. This is what you are going to have to pay if you are trying to raise a 2-adult, 2-child household in this city. Now, I will next direct your attention to 2 columns, the 1-adult and the 1-adult, 2-child household columns. You will note that the combined cost of 1 adult and 1 adult and 2 children living in separate homes totals close to $80,000, a $30,000 additional outlay in minimal costs. Yet we have repeatedly seen both African American women and feminists generally assert that the nuclear family is some form of oppression. How is defraying $30,000 in expenses oppression? I do not follow this logic. If you are asking someone to help you raise 2 children, to assist you in provisioning and caring for those children, you should at the very least ensure that you are not unduly imposing upon their body by forcing them to subject themselves to wage labor above and beyond the bare minimum required and necessary. Yet perhaps this is an outlier. Perhaps this is merely one city out of dozens or hundreds of possible cities. Let us look at a second city. Let us look at Chicago, Illinois. Now, again, we observe that the cost of maintaining a nuclear family structure, I reiterate, the minimum cost, is approximately $53,000 annually. However, the cost of having the same number of people live in 2 separate dwellings has skyrocketed to close to $90,000 annually, a loss of $37,000 a year. when a community chooses to impose an annual expense of $37,000 per household upon itself, is it any wonder that their wealth accumulation is lower? Where is the racism here? I beg anyone to show me, how does this relate to the level of melanin in an individual's skin? This is not about melanin. This is 101 level economics. If you consolidate expenses, you will pay less money to the capitalist system. You will be exploited less. You will sell less labor at a loss to your employers, or rather, your loss, their gain. And yet, specific communities in our nation have chosen to willfully ignore these facts, instead screaming that melanin is for some reason important in all of this, when, as best I can figure, any community attempting to live in this manner would incur precisely and exactly the same expenses as the African American community has incurred. The family living in Chicago in 2 separate houses is going to incur $750,000 in additional expenses over the lifespan of a child. The family living in Atlanta, on the other hand, is going to incur upwards of $500,000 in additional expenses, closing on $250,000. And yet feminists sit aghast and shocked that the communities adopting these living arrangements have significantly less wealth than communities which have not adopted these living arrangements. How does this even make a shred of sense? Only by utterly and completely ignoring the effects of class warfare upon subsistence-level living standards could you possibly not expect this to happen? Which is what we are going to get into in later videos. The fact that feminists are behaving in a manner in utter and complete ignorance of even 101 level Marxist analysis. The nuclear family is not some insult against femininity or some affront to African Americans. It is a cost-saving device necessary to prevent the laboring class from starving to death. I will not for 1/10 of a second attempt the ridiculous and insulting contention that all African American households are single parent. That is preposterously stupid. Nor will I attempt the ridiculous and insulting contention that all Caucasian or European American households are dual parent or nuclear family. That is again insulting and stupid. What I will contend is that even if we assume the wealth disparity between African Americans and European Americans is attributable not to class, what it is attributable to is the living arrangements adopted by these 2 communities. If we look at the graphic currently being displayed, we can plainly see that the number of single-parent households in the African American community is close to 1/3 of all households, while the number of single-parent households in the European American community is less than 1/10. This is going to have a staggering and massive impact on the aggregate wealth of these 2 communities. Now, I have already asserted that over the lifespan of a child, a single-parent household imposes upwards of $500,000 in expenses onto the surrounding community. Let us examine with these numbers the aggregate impact this would have on the African American community as a whole. We will use, by preference, the Atlanta data. $30,000 a year times 3.25 million households is an increased expense totaling nearly $100 billion annually. Divided by the 10 million households currently comprising the African American community, this comes to approximately $9,000 per household. Over the 30-year time span described in the article, this would total upwards of $270,000 per household, the entirety of the wealth gain attributed to European Americans. Let me repeat that. The entirety of the wealth gain, or very close to the entirety, attributed to racism, can be just as easily explained away by the differences in household organization practiced by African American communities versus European American communities. And this is where I very rapidly lose patience with identity politics. Attributing this to melanin is to completely ignore the cost-saving mechanisms adopted by European working peoples to ameliorate their own oppression. It is to assert that not being oppressed yourself is a form of oppressing other people. This argumentation baffles me. If I am being punched in the face by someone, and they stop punching me in the face to turn and punch someone else in the face, do I owe the second person being punched in the face something because I am no longer being punched in the face? What a ridiculous proposition. When we proceed with our work in assaulting class antagonism, we must take extreme care not to make the vanguardist error of insulting or belittling the efforts of the laboring class to emancipate themselves. Yes, these efforts are sometimes faltering, incoherent, and may seem completely obtuse. This does not change the fact that these efforts are important. The nuclear family is not some vile racist or sexist oppression. It is an effort by working people to control the expenses of their household, to emancipate themselves from wage slavery. Yes, I do not apologize for that term. Being forced to sell my labor when I do not want to sell my labor, when I do not benefit from selling my labor, under threat of starvation and hypothermia, is a form of slavery. The chains may be invisible, they are still there. The African American community, or more specifically, the radical feminists within the African American community, have imposed onto their community a $1 trillion a decade bill for their lifestyle. I can think of no comparison for this except the Wall Street bankers howling to the government to come save them after they had destroyed their own financial institutions and nearly taken the nation with them. That is what I hear when I hear African American women talking about reparations. Bankers sobbing and shrieking to the government for money. Ladies, did your men spend 4 decades running in circles shrieking, "We don't need no girl, we don't need no girl"? No, that was you who spent 4 decades running in circles shrieking, "We don't need no man, we don't need no man." And now that the bill for this behavior has come due, you think European Americans have to pay it? You chose to throw your man out the door. You chose to adopt a political and economic philosophy that imposed staggering cost burdens on your community. And you think this has anything to do with melanin at all? It does not. This is 101 level economics. You imposed an additional cost burden on your community, and now your community has less money. If you wish your community to have more money, cease imposing cost burdens upon it. I am going to close with an article I saw recently from the Atlanta Black Star. I'm not even going to bother posting it here. You can go find it yourselves. I may post it in the low bar. The price tag of reparations was cited at in excess of $100 trillion. This is literally 1/300th of the world's population, demanding 40% of the world's wealth be handed to them. For what? I'm not going to waste time speculating. This movement is not interested in equality. They are not revolutionary. They are not interested in changing the fact that a small handful of people control the lion's share of the world's goods and services for their own benefit. They are insurrectionalist. They are interested only in changing which handful of people control the lion's share of the world's goods and services, and which people benefit. This is not the road forward, and I will not support it.